there, it's Adam here. Today I'm talking about some popular psychological myths that many people treat as facts, and they're the kind of myths that that sort of work their way into the hypnotherapy field in particular. So that's the reason for me talking about them and addressing them here in this video. Now, all of us have had some first-hand experience at being human. I certainly hope so, at least. And at times, we may even consider ourselves to have a certain degree of expertise at analyzing our own and other people's behaviors and psychology. Certainly, a great many in the field of hypnotherapy that I work in tend to consider themselves, switched on psychologically, despite perhaps perpetuating some of the myths that I'm talking about today. So whether you love psychology and are passionately pursuing a career within it or on the fringes of it, or you're just interested in learning about human nature, you're likely, I think, to have come across several intriguing ideas about human psychology and behavior in general. And all this leads to what's often referred to as folk psychology or pop psychology. And lots of people kind of, just refer to it or almost as being sort of common sense psychology, which sort of enables us to predict and describe human behaviors and thoughts and emotions in our day-to-day lives. But are all of the popular psychological facts that many of us so readily believe to be the truth, are they actually real facts? Obviously, I'm going to be suggesting not. But do these widely held beliefs have any scientific evidence to support them? Again, obviously, I'm going to be suggesting that they don't. Now, while some of these thoughts may or may not have crossed your mind, they're the topic of my video today, and I wanted to say and suggest that perhaps and maybe not all of the psychological facts that we tend to believe are really true. Some so-called psychological facts are actually just myths that have existed and have been sort of passed down and regurgitated and rehashed and so on throughout the years. I think it's important to question our own understanding, especially as it may influence decisions that you make in life or actions that you take, but also it could influence your work, especially if you work in a field such as mine, whereby psychological understanding is so important. So here are 10 psychological myths that you might have believed were facts. And the first one is that people learn more efficiently if taught through their preferred learning style. This is our first myth. I'm pretty sure that this is something you would have heard when education standards or examination styles have been discussed in the news, for example. And while this idea may be something or seeming to gain quite popular support, I have to burst this bubble by informing you that this is indeed nothing more than a myth. It may be widely held that we can learn more if we're taught through our favored method. However, research tends to show that people do not necessarily learn better through their preferred mode of study. Rather, the effectiveness of teaching methods depends upon the nature of the material that needs to be studied. So while British teachers found in a survey that 96% of people believe in this myth, it's important to note that there are no proper tools that actually measure and define learning styles. What we assume measures our learning style may, in fact, be measuring people's learning performance. So our second myth, myth number 2, is that human memory is the equivalent to a recording of the event. And we might be able to relate to this in a wide number of ways, and may find this a little difficult to believe, some people, particularly when we might have experienced the notion of memory as a recording. And this very metaphor is, in fact, very inaccurate and misleading, since it tends to point out an unrealistic level of accuracy with regards to our memory. Remember, our memories are not static. That is, they change over time. They can even be distorted. They can be a distorted version of the events that actually happened. Around 63% of 2,000 people in a recent survey believed that memory worked like a video camera and was just stored. If observed, this notion can actually tamper with the credibility of eyewitness testimony as well, and has been raised in a great many cases, litigation cases around the world. Many psychologists and researchers also believe that confidence in one's memory and accuracy are only vaguely correlated, and therefore your strong memory is not necessarily very strong. Memory is a process. Memory has been scientifically proven to be reconstructive. That is, we reconstruct our memory on the day that we do the process of remembering, and we do so through the lens of the person that we are today. And the person we are today is different than the person that we were when the memory was originally formed. Okay, our third myth number 3, is that we use only 10% of our brain. It's believed that this myth can be connected to a statement by psychologist William James, someone who I've quoted a great deal. And he wrote, that we are making use of only a small part of our mental and physical resources. I doubt that average persons achieve more than about 10% of their intellectual potential. Now, while he tended to talk in terms of underdeveloped potentials, many people eventually took this to mean 10% of our brain. However, if this is researched scientifically, there are several reasons to doubt that around 90% of your brain is silent or unused or dormant. First of all, how would it be possible that given our body weight, our brain uses 20% of the oxygen that we believe that we breathe, when only 10% of it is functional, so-called? Additionally, why is it that losing far less than 90% of your brain to some accident or disease can have such disastrous consequences? And again, electrical stimulation of various brain areas has failed to point out any silent areas, any dormant regions of the brain. It turns out we all use much closer to 100% of our brain after all, and certainly far more than 10% of our brain. Neuroscience tends to support the notion that we use far closer to all of our brain in a variety of different ways. Our fourth myth number 4, is this idea that expressing one's anger is better than holding it in. I'll say this much as far as this is concerned. Suppressing anger is really a good idea. Okay, so you grit your teeth, you hold it in, I'm fine. And now the good news is that suppression and holding it in does actually work. You can bottle up your feelings and not look angry. However, it's almost always a bad idea. Yes, it prevents the anger from getting out, but when you fight your feelings, they only get stronger. Now, when experimental subjects have been told of an unhappy event, for example, and then instructed to try to not feel sad about it, they end up feeling worse than people who are informed of the event, but given no instructions about how to feel. In another study, when patients who were suffering from panic disorders listened to relaxation tapes, their hearts beat faster than patients who listened to audiobooks with no explicit relaxing content. Bereaved people who make the most effort to avoid feeling grief, research suggests, take the longest to recover from their loss. When you try to stop yourself from crying, the tears are not cathartic. You don't feel better afterwards. So anger is no different. What happens in the brain when you try to clamp down on that rage, it's a whole mess of bad stuff, to be honest. Your ability to experience positive feelings goes down, but not negative feelings. Your stress soars, your amygdala, the part of your brain that's closely associated with emotions, starts working overtime. And fighting your feelings uses a lot of willpower. So afterwards, you have less control, and that's why you're more likely to do things you regret after you are angry. And you know, bad moods foster risk taking by impairing our ability to self-regulate. Self-regulation, you know, instead, you know, there's a number of studies that have shown that risky tendencies are limited to unpleasant moods accompanied by high arousal. Neither sadness nor neutral arousal resulted in destructive risk taking. So that was a long way for me. But, you know, I was sort of defending one side of the opposite of my main argument. You know, some of you might be saying, I knew bottling it up was bad. You should let that anger out. But that's a myth. You know, in one survey, 66% of undergraduates believed that expressing repressed anger, also sometimes referred to as catharsis, it is an effective way of reducing the risk of aggression. Ideas of, and these popular notions of getting something off your chest and venting, therefore have remained really popular. And it's believed, you know, that punching a pillow or screaming, even at times breaking stuff, can help you deal with anger better. Wrong. Don't vent your anger. Don't punch the pillow or yell and rant about the encounter to a friend. It's not a good idea. Venting your anger doesn't reduce it. Venting intensifies emotion. Focusing on a negative emotion will likely intensify the experience of that emotion further, and it will make, you know, down regulation more difficult, which leads to lower adjustment, lower well-being. More than 40 years of research have revealed that expressing anger directly can, and usually does, actually intensify aggression. Sharing your feelings with others constructively can be a good idea, but getting it out tends to snowball your anger. So what does work? Well, distracting yourself on one hand, because your brain has limited resources. Thinking about something else means that you have less brain power to dwell on the bad stuff. But even better is reappraisal. Reappraisal has some strong neuroscientific evidence to support it. You can come and enroll on one of my diploma courses for more information on how to do that effectively. It would take far more than this video allows. So our fifth myth, myth number 5, is that of opposites attract. These days, the idea that opposites attract is a very common phenomenon. And in fact, you know, it's very popular these days. We've all seen a variety of films, we've read books that are based upon this premise, this idea. I mean, it must be disappointing for some of you, I'm guessing, then, to realize that this notion is scientifically invalid and therefore renders lots of books and films that you may or may not have enjoyed obsolete. In fact, on one dating site that's called Soul Match, Harville Hendricks, the relationships expert, states that it's been my experience that only opposites attract because that's the nature of reality. Now, while many may believe that compatibility is the basis for a relationship, it's interesting to note that compatibility is, in fact, grounds for boredom. Hendricks does need to get his facts straight, though, because a lot of research exists that explains and shows that people with similar personalities are more likely to hang out and are more attracted to each other than people with dissimilar personality traits. Such similarity assures not only attraction, but also marital stability and happiness. Therefore, if you really are looking for a soulmate, science tends to suggest that you should find someone like you, not unlike you. Now, myth number 6 is that dreams carry symbolic meaning. At least 43% of Americans believe that dreams may reflect some unconscious desires and may even carry some sort of hidden meaning. Therefore, many people believe that dreams can reveal some hidden truth and can that can guide them through various life decisions as well. While dreams truly do remain more or less a secret and a mystery to science, it does not, however, mean that they necessarily carry some symbolic meaning. The theory which has garnered the most scientific support is the idea that dreams are just a cluttered representation of our brain's efforts to assort information together, similar to a file arranging system. Therefore, rather than depending on dreams to interpret the future or to make life decisions, it's better to weigh up the benefits and the costs of action and then make a decision that way. Myth number 7, our seventh myth today, is the entire left brain, right brain ideology. I'm left-brained or I'm right-brained kind of notion. This is a myth that people have long believed in, especially in my professional field. Still support this and still profess it to be true. I'm sure that you've long heard that left-handed people have their right side of the brain dominant, and that right-handed people have the left side of their brain as the dominant side. It's also believed that people who use the right side of their brain are most likely to be creative and artistic, if you use the right side of your brain most. And that's not really how the brain works, however. While certain parts of the brain may be more specialized to perform certain functions better than the rest, it doesn't necessarily inhibit other parts from not working at all or working less. In fact, surprisingly, both parts work equally well. This myth has been widely held for decades, and it's been spread by a lot of New Age thinkers. However, recent innovations in technology, medical technology in particular, have provided us with great insight into brain functionality, and has proven this myth to be incorrect, to be wrong. According to scientists, the two hemispheres are much more similar than they are different in their functions. Our eighth myth, myth number 8, is that mental illness is linked to chemical imbalance in the brain. It's a bit controversial for many people, or it seems controversial for many people. And for some, this sounds surprising. A lot of people, actually believe this myth and think this way. For example, a survey in the United States a few years ago showed that around 80% of people believed that it was actually a disruption in the chemical proportioning of your brain that leads to a mental illness. It's a very pathological model. And this idea can also be linked to the idea that antidepressant medication changes the level of neurochemicals in your brain. But in reality, this doesn't necessarily mean that a chemical imbalance is the root of the idea, or is the root of the problem. It is an idea that's been supported by many mental health campaigners and many mental health experts as well. Maybe because that they believe that it provides sort of a medical legitimacy to mental health conditions like depression and anxiety when they are pathologized. Recent research has shown that such popular theories, in contrast, can only increase stigma around mental health illness and diseases. So, for example, promoting the idea that mental health problems are permanent. So there's a great deal more to discuss on this topic. I can't exhaust it. I explained to my own students that a preferred model of understanding of many authors and researchers for a wide range of therapeutic issues, though particularly anxiety and depression, tends to be a biopsychosocial model. That is, there are some biological, some psychological, and some social aspects that have contributed to the onset and the development of the cited mental health problem. We inherit in a number of ways. We learn a great deal from those closest to us. And so if a parent, carer, or an influential figure in our life has a mental health issue, we sometimes learn to have similar psychological processes. What we are subjected to within our environment influences us psychologically as well as socially. Brain structures influence our mental health, as neuroscience shows us, but this is not wholly genetic. It's not just a genetic predisposition, which is considered less influential given findings of studies of twins, for example. Um, but also responses to life and the way our brains have developed, through, that have been affected. Brain functioning is known to have been affected by trauma, for example, or sustained problematic thinking habits, for example. What's more, the relationship between neurochemicals and experience is bidirectional, meaning that environmental triggers influence neurochemistry at least as much as neurochemistry influences experience. So it's reasonable to think of psychotherapy, including hypnotherapy, my field, as a means for directly or indirectly affecting neurotransmitter levels in the brain. And I teach as much, along with sharing supporting evidence and demonstrate accordingly on the courses that we run here. So our penultimate myth, myth number 9, is that brainstorming new ideas in groups is a better way of learning than generating ideas on your own. This idea has been widely used in classrooms where group activities have been greatly supported. You've been constantly asked to brainstorm ideas with fellow group members and come up with a presentation or come up with a set of ideas, for example. And therefore, this practice has led us to believe that brainstorming is an effective practice. The sum of the parts is greater, or rather, the outcomes are greater than the sum of the parts, and so on. But this is also a myth that needs to be busted. The fact is that many studies showing or do show that the quality of ideas that are generated through brainstorming are often the quality is often poorer than those generated by the individuals themselves. So it's probably a better idea to generate ideas as individuals, first of all, and then to bring those ideas to the group and explore together or add together accordingly afterwards. That's probably the best direction to take with regards to that. So our final myth, myth number 10, is that rote memorization is the best way to retain information. A common practice among many students is that of rote learning. It's been used by many to make it through their exams and monthly assessments. At the same time, many may believe that this is an effective method for a student that can guarantee good grades. But if facts are to be checked, however, it's been proven that information retained by clearly understanding the meaning is much better, much more effective when compared to constantly repeating the information over and over again. Rote learning without understanding the meaning verges on being useless. Many people tend to be prone to forgetting that information that's been learned pretty quickly. Moreover, it's easier to lose focus during rote learning, and it doesn't really allow a deeper understanding of the subject that you wish to study. Instead, it might result in a wrong impression of a concept. Understanding rules the day when it comes to remembering and being able to recall information. So those are our 10 myths for today. It can and has been argued that much of what we see or hear may not be true, and psychology is no different. As human beings, we all try to make sense of the world around us, and therefore, we often play the role of armchair psychologists, especially when especially with the emergence of so much reality television and media, for example. There's so much information around us, and without looking into its validity, we often make this information a part of our life. We see it and assume it as common knowledge, when in fact such misinformation can lead to imprecise assumptions about human nature, which it might seem a bit trivial, but actually have the capacity to affect our daily decision-making process. It makes sense to know the correct psychological facts. So here I shared a few psychological myths that I thought you might find interesting. You might try to look into some other psychological myths that you and those around you thought were facts, and apply some critical thinking to them. That's all for today. Thanks for tuning in. Do subscribe to this channel. Do have an explore of my college website for our range of live and online courses on the topics of hypnosis, hypnotherapy, and for learning self-hypnosis. I send you my very best wishes. Goodbye for now.